Hi folks, it's the Sports Tutor here. Today we're going to talk a little bit about basic base running rules for baseball and softball. In particular, we're going to talk about the difference between a force out and a tag out. These two ideas in base running are very, very important, and you must understand what these are, because if you don't, everything else you learn about baseball and softball will not make any sense. In order to understand just about everything with baseball and softball base running, you have to understand the concepts of a force out and a tag out, and we're going to talk about that today. We're also going to talk about tagging up and what it means to be doubled off. And together, if you can understand these four things, you'll be well on your way to understanding a lot about the game of baseball and softball.
So I've got this rather ordinary drawing of a softball or baseball diamond. I'll be using the words baseball and softball interchangeably. Everything I talk about today applies pretty much to both. And I'm going to assume only that you understand the basic idea that as a batter, you'll start at home plate and you'll run around the bases, first, second, and third, like this. These red X's are just meant to represent the typical positions of the players out in the field. And I'm going to try to explain some of these things without using a lot of terminology that you don't already know. And for the purposes of this explanation, I'm going to use this little card because in some of the examples I give, we're going to assume that the ball was caught in the air by the fielder on a batted ball. And on this side, it says the ball touches the ground. So I'll lay this here so that we'll know which case we're talking about. Ball touching the ground means either you hit it into the ground like a grounder, or you hit a ball that nobody could catch. It even means a ball that somebody tried to catch and it hit their glove and they dropped it. All of those are treated the same. The other thing I want you to remember as I go through this is, until I say otherwise, all of the examples are going to assume that there are less than 2 outs. That means 0 outs or 1 out, not 2. There's a reason for that, and the reason is not that the rules are really any different when there's 2 outs, but what you will do as a base runner may be different with 2 outs. But I don't want to get to that right now. We're going to keep it simple and explain it with examples that only involve less than 2 outs. Okay, so as a base runner, there are 2 ways that you can be put out by the other team. There's actually more than 2, many more than 2, but we're going to focus really on 2 of the main ways that a base runner can get out. Okay, one involves a member of the other team holding the ball, usually in their glove, and touching your body with the ball in the glove while you're not touching a base. That is a familiar play despite that explanation. It simply involves the fielder tagging you out. They take their glove, the ball's in the glove, they slap you with the glove, and you're out. Okay? The other case, and if you watch any baseball or softball at all, I'm sure you've seen this, a player can be out if the fielder catches or holds the ball while their foot is touching the base that you are running toward, and they don't have to touch you at all, right? The first of those is called a tag out. And the second, where they only have to touch the base with their foot and they don't have to touch you, that's called a force out. Okay? So when or why would a fielder tag you out or touch the base to force you out? Well, touching the base is a lot easier because there's nothing you can do about it. You can't get around them. You can't trick them or knock the ball or run around them. So it's easier for them to get you out that way. So a fielder will always try to force you out with their foot on the base unless they have no other choice. So now let's talk about some of these situations. Okay, again, we're going to say there's less than 2 out, and we're going to make some assumptions here about our team, our offensive team. So we got some players on the team. That's Abe. That's Tom. And that's George. Okay? So in my example, Abe will be up to bat and nobody's on base. Now if Abe hits the ball, on the ground, Abe is going to start running toward first base, right? Now, when he runs to first base, that's a force out. Why? Because he has to run to first base. He can't just stay where he is, and he can't go backward. So if he hits the ball on the ground, he has to run to first base. And if he does, and a fielder can throw it to the first baseman who can stand with his or her foot on the base, that's considered the simplest kind of force out. And if that happens before Abe gets to the base, then Abe is out. Okay? Now, let's say Abe makes it to first base, and Tom is up to bat. Now, if Tom hits the ball, again, on the ground, Tom has to run to first base, just like Abe did before. And because in baseball and softball you cannot have two people on the same base at the same time, Abe has to run to second base. He has to. He's forced to run to second base. And the reason Abe is forced to run to second base is because Tom is forced to run to first base. Therefore, if Abe is forced to run, then the defense can get Abe out with a force out. That means if the ball, for example, was hit to the shortstop, they could run over or throw it over, and then another player or the same player could stand on second base with their foot on second base, hold the ball, and then Abe would be out. It is a force out. Now, let's say that they don't do that, and Abe makes it to second base, Tom makes it to first base, and then Big George comes up to bat. Okay? If he hits it on the ground, George, of course, has to run. He's forced to run toward first base, which, of course, means Tom has to run to second base, and that means Abe is forced to run to third base. Okay? Now, if that all were to happen, let's say George really knocked it way out over here onto the ground, and there's enough time for Abe to keep on going, which he can do, right? At this point, Abe is not forced to go to home. He's not forced, right? The reason he's not forced is there's nobody forcing him. George can stay at first if he wants to. Tom can stay at second. If that's true and they don't have to go to third, then that means Abe does not have to go home. But if he does try to go to home, then they cannot get him out with a force out with their foot on the base because he's not forced to run. They have to tag his body with the ball because he's not forced out. Now let's take another example. We're going to put Abe on second base, nobody on first base, and Tom is up to bat. And we're going to assume, again, less than 2 out. Tom hits the ball somewhere on the ground, and he starts running to first because he's forced to run to first. But is Abe forced to do anything? No, he's not. There's nobody forcing him to run, so he can stay there if he wants to. And anytime you can stay at the base where you're at without being forced by another runner behind you, then that means you are not forced toward the next base. They cannot get you out on a force out to the next base. So if Tom were to hit the ball on the ground and Abe did try to run to third base, not being forced to, but did it because he thought he could make it, the defense now has to tag out Abe, not go for a force out by touching the base. They have to touch him. That's a big difference. Okay? So again, a force play with your foot on the base can only be done on a runner that's forced to run to that base. So this idea of a force out or a not a force out is a very challenging concept for new players to understand and to remember. Players that have played for a while, it is second nature. It's so obvious, it just seems like it's automatic. But We have to remember that new players don't quite understand this, and that's another reason why I wanted to make this video. Okay, now we're going to talk about another very important idea, which is the other half of this most important rule from which all the other rules and strategies will follow, and that's when the ball is caught in the air by a fielder. Okay, now most of you probably already know that if someone were to hit a ball in the air and it gets caught, then you're out. Okay, that's easy enough. But let's say your buddy Tom is on second base. And again, we're going to assume less than 2 outs. Abe hits a fly ball that is caught in the air. Okay? We know Abe's out anytime that happens, so forget about Abe in this example. But now the question is, what about Tom? So the rules say that if a ball is caught in the air, Tom in fact, everybody who's on base, has to go back to the base where they started when the ball was hit. And after the ball is caught, they can either stay there or they can try to run to the next base. And if they do that, there will not be any force out on them, right? Just like in the other examples with the ball being on the ground. But they cannot just take off and start hauling butt around the bases when the ball's going all the way up in the air, because if the ball is caught, he has to go back. Now, here's an important thing. If the ball is hit in the air and Tom starts to run and somebody catches it, okay, they can then throw or run back, and if they run this way and they put their foot on the base with the ball, a little bit like a force out would look, but this is not that case. But they do the same thing and the ball has been caught and this person is going this way. Guess what? This person is out. Tom will be out if he can't get back before the ball gets there. Okay? If that happens, we call that being doubled off. He starts to run. The ball is caught. He tries to go back. He doesn't get back in time, right? Or if he just keeps on running because he doesn't even know the rules and they throw it over here, he'll be out, okay? He can only run after it's caught, and he doesn't have to even do that. The reason it's called doubled off is because it's a double play. We already know that if you hit the ball in the air, Abe is out. If Tom runs and they throw the ball over here, then Tom is out. That's 2 outs at a time, a double play. As a base runner, you don't want that to happen to you, right? So that important rule about not being able to leave the base until the ball is caught, or if it is, you have to go back before you leave the base when the ball is caught, that leads to the possibility of what we call tagging up, okay? Now, tagging up can happen from any base, but it usually happens from third base. So I'm going to put Tom all the way on third, okay? And I'm going to go back and pretend George is batting. It doesn't really matter, but George is bigger. We're going to assume he hits the ball farther. And a very common play in softball and baseball is if there's less than 2 out and George hits a fly ball, but a far one, like goes way out here, okay? What will happen is, and if you ever watch on TV, you see this happen quite a lot. Let's say this center fielder catches the ball in the air, okay? After it goes into that person's glove and it's caught, then Tom, while standing on the base, by the way, if that happens, we know George is out. After it's caught, then Tom starts to run, and he can score a run unless this throw comes all the way in and gets here first, in which case the catcher has to not just step on the base, but has to tag Tom out. And that's not easy to do. So that's why you see this happen a lot. Now, the same thing could happen if Tom was at first base, but if he hits the ball the same person, Tom has to wait till it's caught. Then Tom starts running. Well, that's a pretty short throw compared to this long throw. It's not as safe. It's a good chance Tom will be out if he tries this. Now, if you've paid attention and you've understood this a little bit so far, an interesting question might come to you, which is, let's say that George is up, Tom is on first, there's less than 2 out, and George hits a ball, and it's not obvious whether or not anybody can catch it. It's kind of high up in the air. A bunch of players are maybe running to try to see if they can get there where it's going to come down. You don't know if they're going to be able to get to it in time, or you don't know if the person who's trying to catch it is good enough to catch it. So it could be caught, but it might hit the ground. And so what do? Well, if you've been paying attention, what you'll realize is if the ball does hit the ground and they throw it to second before Tom gets there, Tom is going to be out. But if they do catch the ball and Tom starts to run and they throw it back to first, then Tom's also going to be out. So what do you do in a situation like that? Well, that's not easy. What coaches usually tell the players in that situation is to try to sort of go halfway. Take a few steps, pay attention to what's happening, because what you want to try to do, if possible, is to be able to go either way. You kind of go out halfway, and if the ball touches the ground, you immediately haul butt over to second. But if they somehow make the catch, then you've got to quickly run back to first. If you can be in a position where you can go either way, then that's really good. That's what you want. Sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes there's no way to do both. So you have to get lucky, right? If you go too far this way, yes, you'll make it easily. If they drop it, you might even make it farther than that. But if they catch it, you're dead, right? If you don't go far enough, well, then you're safe. If they catch it, you can just go back. But if they drop it, now you have a long way to go, and you're probably dead in that case too. So the thing to do is to try to get as good a possible look to see if you think they are going to catch it or not, and try to position yourself where you can go either way depending upon what happens. And if you're in doubt as to what's going to happen, it's better to stay closer to first than to second. Why? Because if the ball is caught and you're out here, we know that's a double play because the ball is caught, George is out and you're out, right? But if you make the other kind of mistake where the ball is not caught and you were too close to first, yes, you might be out, but George will probably make it over here, in which case you still only have 1 out. Now that out is you, but 1 out is better than 2 outs, right? So that's the reason why, if you're not sure, it's safer to stay a little bit closer this side than this side. Because also, another rule to point out here, which we've already talked about, but you may not have thought of it this way, let me put them back this way, is if George hits the ball and it's up in the air and it's caught, it's not a force out anymore, right? Because George is out, he is not forcing you to run. That's why you not only can, but of course if it's caught, you must go back to first. You can then go towards second if you think you can make it, but that doesn't happen very often. Okay, that's if the ball was caught. But if the ball's not caught, well then it is a force because George is running to first now because the ball's not caught. That means you have to run to second, in which case you could be forced out.
Well, what did you think of all that? I know it's a lot to learn and remember and understand, but I think as you start to play more and practice more, these ideas will become a lot more familiar. I suggest you come back to this video from time to time after you've played a little bit, and I think these concepts will make more and more and more sense. Good luck and enjoy playing softball and baseball. They're really wonderful games.